This story isn't being told just because it's a black person that existed in this time. This is one of the greatest composers that was overlooked because he was black. My name is Chris Bowers, and I composed the original score for Chevalier.
My name's Michael Abels, and I produced and arranged the on-camera music for Chevalier.
So my role was to compose the original score that is following the story on an internal level. The things that are just happening internally or emotionally throughout the story.
My job was to make the music that's performed on camera.
Chevalier is the story of Joseph Bologna Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who is a real-life composer from 18th century Paris. He was actually born in Guadeloupe from a Parisian father and a Senegalese mother who was a slave. He rose to fame in Paris as a prolific composer, violinist, and fencer.
He is a person like we relate to Prince today. He could write music, perform music. He would be selling out stadiums.
I actually wasn't that aware of much of Joseph Bologna's story. It wasn't until I got the script, and it was a really profound discovery for me. I really wish that I had known more about him when I was younger, just in terms of having heroes that looked like me.
There's a kind of showy aspect to his music that I feel like helps me understand who he was as a person.
Even with its flashiness, it still also feels like something that you can sing and hum and really enjoy. I remember first reading Stephanie Robinson's script, how she portrayed Joseph, and it just felt like it belonged today.
She had found the duality of someone mixed race, and I could really imagine that those struggles were the ones that he had in the time period that he lived.
For me, coming onto this project, one of the first things that I thought of was how important it would be to have an incredibly diverse group of people recording this music. After one of my first meetings, and they were like, yep, we're already on it. Everybody worked very hard to make that happen. I decided to make the main instrument cello. The violin was almost his persona. It was like this thing that he did to be accepted. For me, the cello got to something deeper that might have been an internal experience for him. The other thing that I wanted to do is have this modern sound using effects, but have everything originate with instruments that are more traditional. Violin parts that are detuned, different percussive sounds like hitting the string with the bow, and played the inside of a harpsichord with mallets. Came up with these themes that felt like they were inspired by his music, but do something modern with it. The relationship with Marie Josephine is represented by piano. There's a lot of low end because I wanted this a more modern sound. When I first thought about how to write this theme for their love story, we wanted to feel like it's a bit wrong, essentially, something that had that darkness in it. You know, our villain of the story, Montalivet, there's this chorus of celli, half of which have been detuned. To me, makes it a little bit darker. That was the only time that I looked outside of Joseph's music for inspiration. For that, I actually looked at Mozart, just because of how Mozart felt about Joseph. Monty represented how a lot of the world looked at Joseph in this negative way. For the end credits, we knew we wanted to use Joseph's violin concerto in G major. We ended up finding Randall Gooseby. It just so happened that he just performed that piece. He already had it memorized and came in and articulated how he needed the orchestra to support him. It was really amazing to kind of, in that moment, sit back and let him lead the session. And I really think that he did Joseph's music and those violin parts justice. Over time, Joseph's music goes from being more for himself to then being more for a cause. To lift the voices of these revolutionaries, I think, is also an inspirational message.
And finally, you hear him choosing to separate from the Parisian society that he had spent his whole life trying to be a part of, exerting his own independent voice.
I think there are a lot of things that frustrate me about the nickname, the Black Mozart. His name and his music deserves solo recognition that we give all of the greats. This film feels so important, making sure that Joseph and his music and his life is something that is more widely known. It's a huge inspirational message.